You're tuned to Night Nerves, where if it's scary, creepy, thrilling, or disturbing, we read it, watch it, and talk about it. I'm Sam, and you might have noticed this already, but I have a different background behind me. I'm not only in a different room, but I am in a different city. This is where I live. This is my small apartment. I'm actually in my bedroom. My bed is right here. There's a big picture window right here that makes it very hard to light this room, but I was really eager to talk about the books I read during autumn, rank them, review them, and get ready for winter. One last thing before we get started, I want to talk about the order in which I read these books because I think it does have an effect on the way that I rate and rank them. The first book I read was The Cellar, then I read Phobia, then I read Night Swift Dragons, then I read Harvest Home, and then I read Halloween Night and Halloween Night 2 back to back, just before and on Halloween. So without further ado, let's rank and review these books. In sixth place, we have Phobia by Guy N. Smith. Let's start with reading the back. Number 13 Schooner Street was a typical terraced house in an up-and-coming area of South London, or so John and Leah Strike thought when they first moved in with their children. But then the nightmare started, vivid, harrowing images of gruesome violence that tore into their consciousness, leaving behind rabid, phobic reactions to the simplest of everyday things. Caught in a web of their own deepest fears, too scared to leave home, too terrified to remain, reason told them that the only thing to fear was fear itself. But then the terrors that festered in the shadows of the evil house took on a life of their own, and the grisly killings began. In many ways, Phobia is a traditional haunted house story with some added gruesomeness. It's pretty well written, there's some great scenes and imagery in the novel, but overall it just felt a bit flat to me. In my opinion, the most effective haunted house stories have a strong emotional investment in the characters. That way, when they are experiencing the haunting, we feel empathy for them and we are experiencing those terrifying moments along with the characters. Despite Smith dedicating a number of pages to hanging out with these characters, he doesn't really add any depth to them. I didn't feel particularly invested in their fates. When I was showing off the books for my autumn horror TBR, I predicted this, saying that character development is not one of Guy N. Smith's strong suits, but I think I was still hopeful that this was going to be a crazy and bloody take on a haunted house story at the hands of Guy N. Smith, and it felt overall pretty tame. Still, you could do a lot worse if you're looking to read some retro pulp horror. 2.5 stars. Phobia is actually the one book on this list that I did a reading vlog for. I got my feet wet, I finally did one. So that should be coming out sometime soon. I still need to cut together that video. So we have that to look forward to. I'm excited to see how it comes together. In fifth and fourth place, we have Halloween Night and Halloween Night 2. Both are by R.L. Stine and part of the Point Horror series. Because of the similarities between these two stories, I decided to review them together. Let's start with reading the back of Halloween Night because there are some spoilers on the back of Halloween Night 2 if you have not read the first one. Brenda hates her cousin Haley, and Brenda isn't the only one because Haley keeps stealing other people's boyfriends. So Brenda and her friends decide to plan the perfect murder, something to go along with Brenda's perfect Halloween party. Not that they're going to really kill anybody. It's just a joke, right? As I mentioned before, there's a lot of similarities between these two books, which is why I'm reviewing them together. He basically recycles the first story into the second one and does it all over again. However, I do think Stine did a better job in Halloween Night 2 at fleshing out a lot of the concepts and the events in the story. To me, both stories didn't feel very Halloween-y. I've definitely read other books by R.L. Stine that texturize Halloween a lot better. And the two stories are pretty silly. If you've read basically anything else by R.L. Stine, you're probably going to find these stories very formulaic. However, I knew that going in. That's part of the reason I picked up these books. I like the feeling of nostalgia that I get from reading R.L. Stine. I find there to be a coziness in the formulaic structure of his stories. You know what you're getting into. It feels fun. It feels campy. These aren't the best R.L. Stine books, but they're certainly not his worst. If I had to rate these individually, I would give this 2.5 and this 3. This is somewhere between 2.5 and 3, but since it was better than this one, I feel like I gotta give it a 3. And I'm feeling generous, it's autumn, I'm bumping these up to 3. In third place, we have The Sellar by Richard Lehman. Let's read the back. They call it Beast House. Tourists flock to see it, lured by its history of butchery and sadistic sexual enslavement. They enter, armed with cameras and camcorders, but many never return. The men are slaughtered quickly. The women have a far worse fate in store. But the worst part of the house is what lies beneath it. Behind the cellar door, down the creaky steps, waits a creature of pure evil. At night, when the house is dark and all is quiet, the beast comes out. Awakened by an early morning phone call, Donna found out that her ex-husband, Roy, has been released from prison. She immediately dragged her 12-year-old daughter out of bed, and together they hit the road, fast. The last thing she wants is for Roy to get his hands on them again. But fleeing one danger, Donna and her daughter are unknowingly headed straight towards another. They're headed towards Beast House. As far as I know, this is Lehman's first novel, and it has a lot of Lehman's literary staples. It's got fast pacing, there's an evil psychopath in it, there's mean-spirited violence, and there's poorly written romance. As you could probably tell from the synopsis on the back, this does come with trigger warnings. It's violent, there's violence against women. The story gets going at a pretty brisk pace, but somewhere around the third act, it starts to lose speed and the wheels start to come off a little bit. However, Lehman pulls it together for the ending, and it has a pretty strong and devastating conclusion. I think it really sets the reader up for the coming books in the series, gets you excited about them. I really enjoyed the mythology of the Beast House. There's a great scene in the book when they go on a guided tour of the Beast House, and it's a lot of fun to hear about the history. It made me really excited to read the sequel novels. 3.5 stars. Coming in at second place is Harvest Home by Thomas Tryon. Let's read the back. Okay, before we read the back, I gotta show you this. This was, I feel like, present on a lot of horror novels from the 70s. It's got this warning on the back of it. It says, "Warning, do not read this book if you are alone. But if you do, keep repeating to yourself, it's only a book. It's only a book." Incredible. All right, the synopsis. It was almost as if time had not touched the village of Cornwall Coombe. The quiet, peaceful place was straight out of a bygone era, with well cared for colonial houses, a white steepled church fronting a broad common. Ned and Beth Constantine chanced upon the hamlet and immediately fell in love with it. This was exactly the haven they dreamed of, or so they thought. For Ned and his family, Cornwall Coombe was to become a place of ultimate horror. It seems like a premise that has been exhausted at this point, but as far as I know, this was the first story that tackled it. It's about a family that moves into a small, isolated town, and creepy stuff starts to happen. The novel really immerses you in the culture and the characters and the history of Cornwall Coombe. I think I'm saying that right. And I gotta say, for as much as I liked the setup of this story, I really struggled with the first half of this book, to the point where I almost considered not finishing it. Or as bookish folk like to say, DNFing it. At times, it felt like there were too many characters to keep track of, and there were a lot of scenes and conversations between characters that didn't feel like they were going to be relevant towards the story. Things definitely picked up for me though in the second half. It gets a lot more suspenseful, a lot more mysterious. I was very eager to find out how the story was gonna wrap up, and it has a gut punch of an ending. Because of how much I struggled with this story, I really didn't think I would be rating it more than a 3.5, but it's very well written, and it ended up being perhaps the most memorable book of this lot. I finished it maybe a week ago, maybe a little bit more than that, and I just can't stop thinking about it, thinking about the ending, and for that, it's getting a bump, 4 stars. All right, and finally, in first place, the story that I enjoyed reading the most this autumn season was Knights, Swift Dragons, part of Nightmare Seasons. It is the autumn story in the collection. I wasn't able to find a synopsis for this novella anywhere in the book, so I'm just gonna read the first paragraph or so you get a feeling of the story. 6:45 p.m. The air was sharp, like the sudden snap of 2 fingers at memory's goad. The sun bled crimson to the tree-spiked horizon, and the shadows it cast were knife-edged and long. Foliage flared, and the few naked branches were jagged cracks in a sky that was cloudless and darkening. The streets throughout the station were empty, a split second of desertion when all the pedestrians were still paused in doorways, and automobiles waited for the cold thrust of a key. On Center Street, a neon light was brittle and sputtering, buzzing like a summer fly trapped between two panes. On Devon, a shutter banged, a wooden hand clapping for the onset of dusk. And on Fox Road, a garbage can teetered at the edge of a cracked curb. There was no train at the depot, no movement in the park, and a crow by the hospital studied the remains of a long, dead squirrel. The air was sharp, and the streetlights winked on, doubling shadows and multiplying the gloom. The air was sharp, and it did not move. A cop-breath silence that waited for a scream. The story takes place in the 1960s, and the basic premise is that in the evening, a group of postal workers are starting to wrap up their day when a gang of bikers roll up the street, trap them inside the office, and slowly start to pick off the workers one by one for no apparent reason. I'm gonna start with what I didn't care for about the story. There's a lot of focus on the dread and the terror that the characters are experiencing, to the point where it feels like it's repetitive and it's padding out a story. I think Grant could have used less words and less pages to explore the terror that these characters are feeling, and would have still had a very solid story. What I did like was basically everything else. The atmosphere is excellent, it's well written, and the story is unique and compelling. This is the story that, for me, best suited the autumn season, despite not featuring any pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, or other Halloween paraphernalia. It really did a great job of capturing the ambience and the mood of the spooky season. It was just so much fun to read. 4 stars. So there it is, my autumn reading list, ranked, reviewed. Thank you so much for watching this video. Make sure to like this video, leave a comment, share it with a friend, and if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell. It really does make a huge difference for this channel. And also follow me on Instagram if you haven't already. It's at @night_nerves. I hope you enjoy the end of autumn, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Stay spooky.